Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 8 deadline decisions. This is a weekly series where I take you through your final questions and dilemmas ahead of the upcoming deadline. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So we usually discuss all of the press conference updates together in a single section, but Arsenal, I think, deserve their own section this week because there are so many players that are doubts and that are flagged, and a few of them actually important to our FPL teams. And Arteta just absolutely loves it. And objectively, if I step back away from FPL, it is quite funny that every week he just loves the mind games. He really thinks he can get one up on the opposition and the manager. And even if it's a player that's not particularly important to the starting 11, he still doesn't really give us much definitive information, even to the extent, and I'm not saying it's just Arteta that drives this, but every time a player is a doubt, they won't be included in the training pictures. We've seen that with Raya, Ødegaard, Havertz, Saka in the past. And this week, I think every single player on this list, pretty much, it might be all of them, they haven't been pictured in training. And every week it's the case that they just don't show them in training. So I do respect the hustle from Arteta. It is pretty funny, but it's not particularly helpful for our FPL teams. So take everything here with a pinch of salt, because I even said on Twitter or X, whatever you'd like to call it, should we just call it Twitter from now on? Twitter's a much better name. I did say that with Arteta, I almost feel like it's the exact opposite of what he says. If he's really optimistic around a player, I'm assuming they're probably injured, because what we saw with Ødegaard, for example, a few weeks ago when Ødegaard picked up the injury, he was like, do you know what? He might be available. And we now know that he was out long term. And if he's really, really pessimistic around a player, I think, do you know what? They've probably got a good chance of playing. But let's just go through what Arteta said and see if we can glean any information from it. So on Saka, Arteta said, we are hopeful. We have a session this afternoon. Let's see. So that sounds optimistic. Also, on top of that, there is a picture going around, and this is proper nerdy behavior when you see the picture. I'm going to flash it on your screen. You can see part of someone's leg that is sat next to, I think it's Gabriel, and you can just see his calf. Initially, that looks a lot like Bukayo Saka's calf, but the thing that makes it even more likely to be him is that it is a trainer that we've seen him wear a lot in the past, those New Balance trainers. Now, yes, it could be someone else wearing trainers similar to Saka, but by all accounts, that probably looks like it's Saka's leg. Now, it's only in the gym, and they are very clearly only stretching, so there is a chance that he is injured, going through rehab, and that he's just with the squad anyway. But usually in first-team football, even if a player is close to returning, they would do their own individual rehab program before they are ready to go with the team. So I think the fact that he's with the team there, and the fact that we know Saka just plays regardless, on top of the information we have from Lee Carsley, which is basically that he almost was available to play the second game of the international break for England, I think Bukayo Saka is probably going to be fine. There will be rumours going around. Like I even tweeted one today that there are some rumours going around that he's not available. Like it depends on what you want to do with him. I think if you're already really wanting to sell him, maybe the fact that we haven't got definitive news makes you lean that way. But based on everything that we've got today, I'm probably leaning more towards keeping Saka at the moment. I will discuss a bit later in the video that even if he is fully fit, there is some justification to potentially sell Bukayo Saka. On Havertz, if he trains well today, he has a good chance. If you watch the press conference, he seemed a bit more upbeat around Havertz. So I think Saka and Havertz will both start. They'll be fine. It's probably just mind games from Arteta. But if one of them were to miss out, I think it is marginally more likely to be Saka that misses out. I would feel pretty comfortable based on what we've seen that Havertz is available, but that is just a prediction. On Martinelli, again, a little bit more pessimistic here. Arteta said yesterday he did a bit of work outside. Today will be another step, and we will understand if we take the risk. I think probably Martinelli's on the bench. I generally just think Saka and Havertz seem to play every game. They're fitness monsters. Martinelli's not as important to start every game. They can play Sterling. They can play Trossard. They've got other options in terms of who they can play off the left. So my guess would be Saka starts, Havertz starts, Martinelli's benched. Again, that's just a prediction. Thomas Partey is fit, so that definitely shores up their midfield, and at least he was a bit more honest around Thomas Partey. Ødegaard is apparently getting closer and closer, so he said he's not fit for this game, but next week will be crucial. The sooner that Ødegaard is back, the better, because while Saka has been really creative in his absence, and it's not necessarily hurt Arsenal overall, I certainly think that it's hurt Saka's goal threat. His assist threat, as like I said, has been even higher, potentially, but he's not getting those same clear-cut goal-scoring opportunities because he's taken a lot of the creative load for Arsenal. So I think that would be good news for Saka overall. He might be taking off a few set pieces as a result, but generally he still takes those in-swinging corners. He'll still probably be on penalties, and it just means that he can get a little bit closer to goal. So this is good news for Arsenal, and I think good news for Saka as well. And then just on White, Timber and Zinchenko, They are quite close, the three of them. Today we have to try and push. Hopefully we'll have some positive news and we'll have some players back tomorrow. I reckon we'll probably get 1, 2 of the 3 maybe back. You might even get all 3 of them back. I don't think anyone's looking to buy the 3 of them at the moment. If you do own them and you're hoping to start them, maybe you could just start them and hope that they either start or don't feature at all. But generally, I think the main ones are around Saka and Havertz. I would be very surprised if both don't feature, but you just never know with Arteta, I suppose. Let me know down below what you think and what your plans are. I'm probably going to be keeping Bukayo Saka. So as of about 2:30 p.m. UK time on Friday afternoon, here are the rest of the press conference updates. As always, if there are any more throughout Friday or in the embargoed quotes, which we get late on Friday UK time, I'll update you on the Saturday morning deadline stream. So make sure to tune into the deadline stream where we'll go through my team, my transfers, answering your questions, and also go through the latest news as well. But as of Friday afternoon, here is the stuff that we have. So Mykolenko is looking good, was the quote. So I reckon Mykolenko starts, which is great news if you own him. Definitely play him against Ipswich. It's a nice fixture. And then Jared Branthwaite is slightly further behind, but still looks like he could be available for game week 8. So it says right now, sorry, Sean Dyche said right now, we'll have to make a call probably in the next 24 hours. I reckon Branthwaite will be available, but I think if he is a doubt, they just don't want to risk getting him injured long term. Maybe he misses this one game. You would imagine they still have a bit of a chance for a clean sheet, though, considering it's Ipswich regardless. This does make Everton assets moving forward, especially defensive ones, good options if they can keep Mykolenko and Branthwaite fit, because we know at points last season that Everton defence were absolutely brilliant. So this is great news for Everton. If you've got Mykolenko, I would start him. On the Spurs, Son is apparently good. Worked hard this week and is good to go. So Sonny should be starting, you'd imagine. And also Richarlison is good to go now as well. I would imagine that Sonny goes back straight into the starting 11. Richarlison's probably less likely, given that Solanke's the one playing as the 9, Richarlison's playing on the left, and then you've got Brennan Johnson on the right with Kulusevski as the 10. There's not really a place for Richarlison at the moment. Now, will this mean that Solanke gets slightly lower minutes? Potentially, but I'm also not fully convinced. I think we could see a situation where Richarlison is played on the left or on the right, which he has done at points. I think even for Brazil, he's played out there as well. And also Richarlison just might not be first choice. So we might see Solanke come off in the 75th, 80th minute a few times, but I don't think that will happen immediately. Solanke so far this season, as we'll discuss a bit later, has averaged 89 minutes per game for Spurs. He has been a 90-minute man, even more than Son when Son was fully fit. So I wouldn't stress too much, but yes, absolutely. With Son now being back, Richarlison being back, Odegaard being close to being back, a lot of these Spurs assets might see slightly reduced minutes, but I still think that first choice front four is relatively nailed for the time being. On Tyler Dibbling, he is apparently in a good place and will be ready, according to Russell Martin, after he withdrew from the England under-19 squad. I've heard it on good authority from a couple of people now that he wasn't even injured to start with, and it was one of those international break injuries where they just wanted to give him a bit of a rest. So I would imagine that Tyler Dibbling does start against Leicester, and as a result, I'm probably looking at starting him in my FPL team. Van Hecke is back for Brighton, which is massive for them defensively. It means that they're not as much of a fixture to target for our attackers, because without Van Hecke, they were starting the likes of Webster or Igor, and they just looked a lot weaker. But Van Hecke is an absolutely brilliant defender. That will definitely strengthen them. Ruta and Adingra are both fit, so there is a little bit of a chance of rotation in that forward line. João Pedro is still out. The initial aim, I think, was for around game week 12, but it doesn't even look like that's overly likely at the moment. And also March is being managed. I do think once all of Brighton's attackers are fit, if that ever happens, there is so much rotation. But as of right now, the likes of Matoma and Welbeck look relatively nailed. But the fixtures aren't really there until about game week 12 for Brighton. So that's when I'll be targeting their assets. Really interestingly, and probably the big surprise of the Friday press conferences, was actually Johan Wissa is back on the grass, and Thomas Frank didn't even fully rule him out from being in the squad for game week 8. I don't think he will be, but that is a remarkably quick recovery. And if you do own someone like Carvalho or Sharda, I'm not saying they won't still get minutes, and they could start along with Wissa and Mbeumo. But right now, this puts me off pretty much every Brentford attacker and midfielder other than Brian Mbeumo, who will just play 90 minutes in every game, or at least 85 plus. Once Wissa is back, though, given their fixtures, even beyond game week 12, when we keep talking about this fixture swing, Brentford are one of those teams that have decent fixtures now and in the long term. I am looking at Johan Wissa as a seriously good cheap forward option. If I want to downgrade Solanke around game week 12 or in the future, Johan Wissa will be back on the menu because we saw last season how good he can be. On Newcastle, Isak has trained and is in contention for game week 8. As to whether he will play or not, you just never know with Eddie Howe. Every week, people love it in the comments. It's like another dig at Eddie Howe. Eddie Howe, along with Arteta, is just one of those managers that just doesn't really give us much in the presses. But this is great news for Newcastle. I actually built a Game Week 12 wildcard draft in a video earlier this week. I've got a feeling Isak will come back on the menu again around Game Week 12 and will be seriously interested in owning him. Maybe if we do look to downgrade Haaland to upgrade a midfielder to Salah, for example, Isak might be a really nice player to own. Wilson has also trained, but he did specify that Wilson won't be rushed back. So I definitely think Isak is closer than Wilson, and Trippier is out for a few game weeks. On Liverpool, we've had it confirmed that Alisson is out for at least the upcoming weeks, whatever that means. Most people are suggesting that he will return around Game Week 12, which is post the final international break of 2024. So around Game Week 12, Alisson might be back. You could take a punt on someone like Kelleher in the meantime. I would just imagine that we just leave it for now, given the fixtures, though. And this does certainly, at least marginally, reduce the chance of a clean sheet for Liverpool. GW8 is both suspended and injured for Game Week 8. So he's picked up another one-game suspension based on the previous incident. And also on top of that, there have been pictures and videos going around on his partner's Instagram and TikTok where he's on crutches. I haven't, and I've recorded this straight after the presser to be fair, I haven't seen a specific update on how long he's out for, but this definitely does harm Wood's chances of getting returns. You will see in one of the future sections, I still think Chris Wood is a fantastic asset to own, but it might reduce his attacking threat from maybe 5 to 10% at least, which maybe puts you off him slightly if you're buying a new. And this obviously is a massive loss for Nottingham Forest because he is their talisman in the team. Joachim Andersen is apparently fit for Fulham, which is a massive boost because we have seen already, once Andersen come in, they looked a lot more solid defensively. And we've also seen how much Andersen leaving has affected Crystal Palace too. So that is a massive boost for Fulham. And then finally, Munoz, if anyone still owns him, should apparently be available for Game Week 8 along with Adam Wharton. So there we go. Those are the main press conference updates as of Friday around 2:30 p.m, alongside obviously the Arsenal updates that we've already discussed. Let's now get on to answering some of your key questions ahead of Game Week 8. So lots of people asking about cheap forwards in FPL at the moment, and based on absolutely nothing other than just my opinion, a bit of fixtures, eye test, data, everything put together, I have roughly ranked 9 of the cheap forwards that I would be looking to buy at the moment. I don't think I've missed out anyone particularly, but if I have missed anyone out, let me know down below if you'd like my opinion on them as well. But these would be the ones that I am considering at the moment. And I've put here, it depends on your horizon. We know that Game Week 8 to 11 is one fixture block, and around Game Week 12, there is a pretty big fixture swing, and then the fixtures start to improve for some other teams and turn for some others. So, for example, Chris Wood and Raul Jimenez have really good fixtures over the immediate 3 to 4, but beyond that, they start to turn a little bit, especially for Nottingham Forest. I wouldn't want Chris Wood particularly from 12 or 13 onwards. On the other hand, someone like Acuna, I don't love for the next 2, especially this week. But beyond that, especially from sort of Game Week 10 or 11 onwards, the fixtures are really, really good for Wolves. Calvert-Lewin has a bit of both. Immediately pretty good fixtures, and they actually last until around Game Week 13, 14. And so it really depends. Like, even Ilson doesn't have particularly good fixtures now, but if you want a player from 12 onwards, I do really like them. So you need to think about how long are you hoping to own this player for? And maybe it's a bit more of a philosophy question for your own team and how you want to manage it that you need to think about. We've spoken about before, and we'll discuss this in a bit later in the video, that you need to firstly work out with your premiums, what do you want to do? Like, some people want to be moving their premiums in and out quite a lot and switching them based on fixtures. Other people just want to stick with their premiums for the long term. If you're just sticking with your premiums, let's say you've got Saka, Palmer, Haaland, and you're like, I'm not going to touch them for the foreseeable future, then you can probably afford to take a short-term punt on Wood or Jimenez, then move them on to Cunha or a Welbeck around Game Week 12. Like, you can afford to do that because you'll have the transfers. If, however, you're looking at your team now, you don't have Palmer, you're going to take a quick short-term punt on Foden or Son, then move to Palmer, then move Haaland to Salah. Like, if you feel like your transfers are going to be used on moving the premiums around, maybe you're looking at that cheap forward spot in your team and you're thinking, actually, maybe the best thing to do is put a player in that I know I can hold long-term. Like, if you put Cunha in right now, Wolves have really good fixtures until Game Week 18 or 19. So you can just keep them in the long term, and then you can afford to use their transfers. So that's probably something you need to think about yourself and look at your team. But generally, if I'm looking across the next 3 to 4 weeks, Chris Wood and Jimenez do stand out because they just have brilliant fixtures. Lots of home fixtures in there as well. They're both scoring goals. They're both getting returns. For Chris Wood, there are some doubts due to injuries to the team, especially Morgan Gibbs-White. That will massively affect Chris Wood's output, I would think. But regardless, it will mean that he's definitely on penalties. He still scores goals. He's in a good run of form. The fixtures are so good over the next 4. And he just finds ways to score goals. It's not a particularly exciting or sexy pick, but it's a very, very good pick. And based on the fixtures alone, I've got to put Chris Wood top, I think. Raul Jimenez in second. A lot of people seem to think that Andreas Pereira could be the one on pens for Fulham. Regardless, he's just been really good recently. I think he's got a banging free kick in the international break. Like, Raul Jimenez just looks like a man in form. And when he's on a hot run, we've seen in the past in his Premier League career, he can score a lot of goals. And I actually think Fulham are a really good outfit this season. So again, with the fixtures they've got over the immediate future, I really like Raul Jimenez. Cunha is in third despite playing City this week. Honestly, I think City are vulnerable at the back. They're not terrible defensively. I still think they are one of the better defences. But if you had to play him this week, I'm currently looking at potentially doing so. And then beyond that, the fixtures are just so good in the long term. He's a 90-minute man on penalties. And I think Wolves are actually a decent attacking team. They're not brilliant, no. But with the fixtures they've got, I expect goals. So Cunha's in third. Maybe slightly lower than I would normally think. But Calvert-Lewin, I've got him fourth. And that's just because he feels like a Bruno Fernandes or an Eze. Like, you look at the data, it's pretty good. You look at the eye test, like, he doesn't look bad when you watch Everton, and you just think, how is he not getting more returns? He plays 90 minutes, he's on penalties, like, he's got a lot of what you would want, but he just finds ways to not score goals. And there was the stat going around at the start of the season, which we maybe should have paid more attention to, that Calvert-Lewin is actually the worst finisher in the Premier League for all strikers that play, obviously, a significant amount of minutes for their team. Maybe he's just not a good finisher. And as a result, you can point to the data and the fixtures, maybe he won't score. I think this week it's such a good fixture for Calvert-Lewin. And when I look across the next 3 to 4, and even slightly longer term than that, the fixtures are just there so much that even if he's not a good finisher, I think returns are coming for Calvert-Lewin. So those 4 forwards there, Wood, Jimenez, Cunha, Calvert-Lewin, for me, they are the best 4, regardless of fixture runs, regardless of your horizon, regardless of when you're wildcarding. Those 4 do stand alone for me. And then after that, Welbeck, if you don't worry too much about fixtures and you're just looking at form, Welbeck has just been so good this season. Vardy, the fixtures are there, the data's not really there, and the eye test wise, it's almost never there for Vardy. Like, Vardy doesn't do much, but then he scores a goal. Like, he doesn't need many touches. Reminds me of Haaland in that aspect. You can watch a whole game and Vardy will do nothing and he'll come away with a brace. He is getting older though. And I do just wonder, like, is his output going to decline? Because in recent seasons, it hasn't been anything close to what we saw, obviously, in like 2015-16, for example. So let's see. I probably would prefer a few others, as you can see here, to Jamie Vardy. Strand Larsen's in there. If you can't afford Cunha, or you just want their out-and-out number 9, Strand Larsen is that guy. His minutes haven't been perfect, but he's started most games. He's very cheap. I don't mind Strand Larsen. At that cheap price as well, Delap. A lot of people won't understand why Delap's in 8th. It's just a data thing for me. I like when I watch him, but the data is so poor in comparison to a lot of these other forwards. And Ipswich just don't really create enough chances for me to suggest Delap ahead of some of these other options. And then the only reason I've got Eva Nilsson in 9th is just simply because the fixtures over the next few just aren't there. But from game week 12, Eva Nilsson would absolutely jump up this list. So there we go. I think it's... any of those 9 would be absolutely fine. But I think for me, it would be short-term, Wood, Jimenez, maybe Calvert-Lewin. And then I think if you're looking for a longer-term punt and you don't mind either benching him this week or starting him in a tricky fixture, I do think in the coming weeks, Cunha will be the most desired forward. And I'm very glad I've got him myself. So guys, I alluded to it in the previous section. I've discussed it throughout the week, so I don't want to talk about it in too much detail. But it's around this idea of Saka and Palmer have pretty tricky fixtures coming up, but they're performing incredibly well. Do you stick with them through the tricky spell, especially Saka, lots of questions around, or do you switch to Son or Foden for the easier fixtures and then go back to Saka a bit later? Because in all honesty, I think we'd all admit that Saka is a better asset than Son and Foden in FPL. At least he is for me, and I think most people would agree. So you're probably going to want to get back to Saka. So it's about do you take out Saka for 4 weeks, then bring him back in, or do you just stick with him through the trickier fixtures? I don't think there is a right or wrong approach here, by the way. Both can work very, very well, and you just need to get lucky at the end of the day. Like, maybe the optimal play would be to do Saka to Son or something like that. If Saka just gets a couple of lucky assists, maybe gets 3 penalties in the next 3 games, you might be on a horrible side of luck or variance there, and you might massively regret it. Equally, let's say in one of the easier fixtures, maybe get someone like Ipswich, Son goes out there and gets 4 or 5 goals, there's no way Saka's matching him over that period. But you just don't know that. We're trying to predict the future, which is incredibly difficult to do. So you do just really need to get lucky. But I think you just need to sit down and think, what is my approach to FPL at the moment? Like, do I want to just stick with Saka and Palmer? Do I want to just pick the 2 players that I think are the best in that position, which for me are Saka and Palmer? Or do I maybe want to switch to a Son or Foden and really attack the upside? Know that there is risk associated with selling brilliant FPL assets, but really go after the fixtures. Some managers are fixture-based and some managers are form-based. I'm probably somewhere in between. But as of right now, and I'm not saying that you copy me, but I'm just giving you an idea of where my headspace is with FPL, I think I'm of the opinion that I just want to keep Saka, Palmer, and Haaland for the time being. I think right now, and this is no disrespect to Salah, by the way, who's not even in this conversation, I think Salah's fantastic. But right now, I think the three best premiums are Haaland, Saka, and Palmer when you consider pricing and everything else it does for your team. If you ask me in a few weeks, that may well change. But I look at Son and Foden, and they do absolutely have massive upside. I just don't want to faff about with moving to Son and Foden and then having to find a way back to Saka. And also, I've got money tied up in Saka and Palmer. So as soon as I start selling Saka and Palmer, especially Palmer, I've got now, I think, 0.3 tied up in, I'd have to then buy him back at a more expensive price. So if you were to ask me, do I think Son or Foden outscores Saka over the next 3 to 4 fixtures? I honestly probably do. I do think that. But am I confident enough that I think it's worth using 2 transfers to bring in, obviously, let's say Foden, and then take Foden out for Saka a bit later, and also losing the value? When you ask me like that, I'm just like, I just don't think it's worth the risk, and I don't think it's worth the use of transfers. For me, in my team, I'm looking at maybe switching around those cheaper assets, because also, with these premium assets, whilst they do perform better in easier fixtures, like you can go through the stats, every single premium asset that has ever existed in FPL will definitely perform better in the easier fixtures. There are certain players that can return regardless. And Saka and Palmer, for me, are absolutely 2 of those. We saw earlier on the season, Saka gets an assist against City and Spurs, both from set pieces, by the way, but that's what he has in his locker. Palmer goes out there and gets a 25-pointer against Brighton. I'm not saying Brighton's a tricky fixture, but it's not necessarily one you target. Last season, he scored goals against one of the best teams in the league. I think they were 2 penalties, but was it City and Arsenal he scored against? I think the benefit of Saka and Palmer, for me, that makes them such fantastic holds is that they're on penalties, they're on set pieces, they tend to play 90 minutes. And because they are involved in such a high percentage of their team's goals, if you expect Arsenal and Chelsea to score across the next 4 games, which you probably do, let's say they even score only 1 a game, you'd probably expect a couple of returns for Saka and Palmer. You'd expect them to be involved in sort of 30 to 50% of their team's goals. And with Saka and Palmer being on set pieces, they don't even need to play well. If Saka has a stinker across the next 4, which he probably won't, by the way, he could just get a couple of corners, 1 penalty, and all of a sudden, it probably wouldn't have been worth selling him. I think some people would absolutely love the idea of moving to Son and Foden. Like, if you watch the FPL Wire Prenil late riser, this is right up his alley of just switching around the premiums and attacking the high upside fixtures, because Son and Foden have a hat-trick in their locker in the next 3 to 4 games because the fixtures and opposition are much easier. I'm just rambling a lot here, but I don't think, like, I can sit here and say the projected points for Saka, I just don't know, right? We're trying to predict the future. I think it comes down to more of like, how do you want to manage your team this season? The other thing that I would note is around captaincy. Most people are probably captaining Haaland across the next 2 anyway. But if there is a period of time where you would like to captain Son, let's say you're actually looking at maybe game week 11, you're saying Son is the best captain in that week, I want to captain Son in that week. When it comes to captaincy, it's absolutely worth making the switch for captaincy. Let's say you want to captain Salah in game week 12. If you think he's the best captain, it's much more worthwhile making that switch. Whereas right now, because I just plan on captaining Haaland for the next few game weeks, it makes me even more tempted and likely to just hold on to the likes of Saka and Palmer. So there we go. That was the worst section I've ever recorded in my life. But basically, my opinion of it as of right now is, for my team and my philosophy of playing, I would rather just keep Saka and Palmer for the time being. I don't have any plans to sell them to Son or Foden. If Saka does become a doubt before the deadline, I would be very tempted. In terms of who I'm more tempted to go for, Foden's my guy in FPL. Like, he's helped me on so many occasions in the past to really climb the ranks. But I have a bit of a feeling about Son in this Spurs team at the moment. Probably on penalties when he's back. Minutes are going to be better than Foden. Fixtures are very similar. 3 home fixtures on the next 4 for Son. I'd be very tempted by Son, actually, if I was going to switch Saka out for either of them. But I've always loved owning Foden. I'd love to know down below how you feel about the premiums at the moment. But for me right now, Saka, Palmer, Haaland are going to be standing my team until at least game week 10, injury and any doubts permitting. So guys, lots of questions coming in for Brennan Johnson and Dominic Solanke. We spoke about Son in a bit of detail, and Spurs really do have the fixtures to attack across the next 4. 3 home games against West Ham, Villa and Ipswich, and also Crystal Palace away. Villa have actually been better defensively than we're maybe giving them credit for. We did look into the stats in the Game Week preview episode, video, whatever you want to call it, and they are the 2nd best defence in the league this season for expected goals conceded, which is crazy to me because I don't feel like that when I watch them. But other than that, the other 3 are all in the bottom half of the table defensively. Ipswich have been really poor. Crystal Palace are struggling. And West Ham, they seem to have found something a little bit in recent weeks, but they're still not a particularly strong defence. So I look at that and I think, yeah, the next 4 are there to target. They then obviously play against Man City in Game Week 12. I think lots of people transition away from Spurs then, because from Game Week 12 onwards, the fixtures definitely turn, but they're not awful. If you can get away with benching them in 12, you can actually hold Spurs assets a little bit longer term. So yeah, basically fixtures-wise, I like them a lot. And also, again, we looked into the data in the Game Week preview video. Spurs are the best attack this season for non-penalty expected goals, and they're second only behind Liverpool for big chances as well. So Spurs are a fantastic attack, arguably the best in the league this season, because they've not even had the best fixtures, by the way. They've just been attacking that well. Lots of it came against Man United, but still, very good attack, and they've got the fixtures. So I can absolutely understand why people are looking at Spurs attackers, and in all honesty, if you're looking for a midfielder or forward this week, I would put Brennan Johnson and Solanke in my top 3 for both positions. So it's difficult to say I would go for one or the other, because some people are asking, should I prioritise Johnson or Solanke? Because there's a million between them in price, and also they're different positions. So if you need a midfielder, go for Johnson. If you need a forward, go for Solanke. But if you're telling me that you have the option to move to either, I still think I prefer Solanke, because everything points towards him being a better asset. The minutes are better for Solanke. The data's better for Solanke. And I still think, and you may massively disagree, I think Solanke is a better finisher than Johnson. However, when Johnson's on a hot run of form, which he is right now, he seems to be scoring everything. And I know Solanke is not a great finisher, but I think he's better than what we've seen in recent weeks. People are looking at that Brighton game, though, and really worrying. So if you didn't watch the Brighton game, Solanke was dropping pretty deep at points. And on top of that, he had 0 shots, so 0 non-penalty expected goals. Terrible, right? That is not what you want. In what felt like a fairly open game, for Solanke to be dropping quite deep and not having any shots, that's a serious worry. But in the 2 games prior to that, he had 7 big chances in 2 weeks. He had almost 3 expected goals in 2 weeks, which was the best in the league across that spell. If you look at his heat map, it's not his touch map, it's his heat map, that is right next to me, just there. Look how much of the time he spends in the middle of the box. I wouldn't worry too much about what we saw based against Brighton. I think that was a very specific game. And I think because of how high Brighton play and also their weaknesses at fullback, I think Spurs probably saw that. And Postecoglou probably thought, do you know what, in this game, if Solanke can drop a little bit deep and create the space for the wingers to get in behind, that's what they're doing. They did that very well. I'm not saying Brennan Johnson's a bad option, by the way. We'll discuss him in a second. I just wanted to say I wouldn't worry too much about that one performance for Solanke, considering, look at his data so far this season. 0.69 non-penalty expected goals per 90. He's even got more creativity than Johnson at 0.11. That is 0.8 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. That's better than most other players in the league. 1.61 big chance involvement per 90 as well. Like, Solanke is just a seriously good asset. Nothing has really changed in my opinion. Now, if against West Ham, he again only gets 0 or 1 shot, and again he drops really deep, we might just say maybe Postecoglou has spotted something in recent weeks and he's maybe made a slight adjustment to Solanke's positioning, in which case maybe going into sort of game week 10, maybe 12 onwards, yeah, we do look to sell him. But for me, I'm very likely giving Solanke the next 4 games, because even if there has been a slight adjustment to his position and he is dropping a bit deeper, he's still a fantastic player and he will score goals as well. We still don't know, he might be on penalties even with Son back. I really still like Solanke. I'm still very high on him. Now, Brennan Johnson, exceptionally good value for 6.6. 0.54 non-penalty expected goals for a £6.6 million asset is brilliant. 7 goals in 7 games is also great. Now, some of those against questionable opposition, but still in a really nice goal-scoring form. I see very little that I dislike about Brennan Johnson. His minutes aren't perfect, but he has started a good few games in a row now for Spurs. So I still think he'll continue to start. Obviously, with Richarlison back, it creates more competition, mainly for Solanke, I would say. But also there could be a situation in which Solanke starts, Richarlison goes out to the left. Maybe they try and play Solanke and Son together. We also know that Werner has been playing relatively well, maybe not perfectly. Kulusevski can play out on the right, which could reduce Johnson's minutes. Uppbeat isn't far away from being ready as well. I still think that Solanke and Johnson are absolutely first choice. And all of those players returning from injury probably hurt Solanke's minutes slightly more than Johnson's, because none of them are really wide right players other than Kulusevski, who's preferred centrally, and Uppbeat, who's not yet back. And also he can play on the left as well. I just think based on what we've seen so far, Solanke has been a 90-minute man. Like, regardless of whether they're winning, losing, chasing, who's playing well, Solanke's just stayed on the pitch in every game, whereas Brennan Johnson hasn't necessarily done so. Listen, I think these are both great. In an ideal world, if I was wildcarding this week, I would have Johnson and Solanke. I think I'd have both of them. But if you're asking me who I think gets more points across the next 4, I'm still backing Solanke. And it's not just because I own him. I just think he's a slightly better asset. So there we go. Basically, if you need a midfielder, get Johnson. If you need a forward, get Solanke. I think they are both brilliant options for the next 4. But I just think Solanke's been a little bit underrated just based on maybe a slight lack of returns and also the performance last week. So then, guys, just to briefly finish off the video, I'll go through my team and what I'm currently planning. And spoiler alert, if you've missed my team selection video, it is very boring. I am currently planning on rolling the transfer. I've just noticed, I didn't even notice it until I started recording, Dibbling's flag has now gone, which is fantastic. So one less flag player in the team. I did obviously have Dibbling and Saka flagged. So this is the way the team is currently set up. The only real thing that I'm thinking about at the moment is, do I want to do Saka to Son or Foden? But as I've already discussed, unless we get a really negative update around Saka's fitness, unless I am pretty convinced that he's not going to play, I'll probably just keep him. Because I also do have bench cover if he were to miss out. It's not like I don't have the bench cover for him. So I think I'm probably going to keep Saka. So that's the first decision, but I've pretty much made it. And then really, when I look at my team outside of that, there aren't many places that I want to use a transfer. So really, it's just that benching decision, which I've spoken about all week. I have to bench one of Dibbling, Cunha, and Rodgers. Pretty much everyone will say that I've got this decision terribly wrong. I'm currently benching Rodgers, and I'm not saying I'm committing to that. But in my team selection video, I basically went through and gave the pros and cons to each of the players. And when I came to Rodgers, I hadn't even really considered benching him. And then I was like, trying to list the pros and reasons that I would want to play him. And I wasn't really coming up with that many. He plays for a decent Aston Villa attack, but we saw in the GameWeek preview video when I went through the data, Aston Villa are 11th for non-penalty expected goals. So they are a middling team in terms of attacking data. And they've not even had bad fixtures, by the way. So they're kind of like a middling team. Rodgers' underlying data isn't that strong particularly. 0.3, in fact, it's not great at all. 0.3 expected goal involvement per 90, 0.13 XG per 90. Like, the data's not good. Aston Villa are okay, but also Fulham are very good defensively this season. They're 6th for expected goals conceded. And also, Joachim Andersen is fit. And with Andersen fit, it makes them even stronger defensively. So I kind of went through and listed, and I was like, hang on a second. I'm not saying Rodgers is bad, and I may well start him, but I didn't just want to auto-start him. And then my other options are Dibbling or Cunha. Both of them are playing at home. Dibbling's obviously got a ridiculously good fixture, and his data's actually slightly better than Rodgers. I know he's not playing in as good of a team. Like, Southampton are not as good as Aston Villa, but that doesn't matter. And I thought Dibbling was very, very good against Arsenal, and we saw against Ipswich in a slightly easier fixture. He does have the ability to score goals, and he's got that something about him where he can create something from nothing. So I do like the idea of starting Dibbling, and it's a bit of fun as well. Like, not many people are going to have him in the starting 11. And then Cunha, this goes against everything that I would normally do as a manager. Like, he's playing against Man City at home. Man City are just a good defence. And I've got Rico Lewis as well, so I'm kind of backing a City clean sheet. So everything's pointing towards me benching Cunha. But Cunha definitely has the best data of all of them. 0.5 expected goal involvement, 0.32 expected goals per 90. He's got the best data. He's also playing at home. He's also got the best minutes. Like, he's played 90 minutes in the last 5 games in a row. And we think that Cunha's probably on penalties. So I've got a 90-minute penalty taker against a Man City team that do find ways to concede, that struggled very much so in the last game against Raul Jimenez. And I think Cunha is a similar profile, but obviously playing a little bit wider. But we saw how much the attackers caused the City defence problems. So I'm not saying I expect multiple returns for Cunha, but I don't think it's crazy to say that he might have an equally good chance, if not slightly higher, of getting a goal than Rodgers. So yeah, I don't know where I stand at the moment. I mean, as of right now, Rodgers is on the bench. It's also a bit of an ownership play, and I don't regularly make decisions just based on ownership. But the fact that Dibbling and Cunha are both lower owned than Rodgers, like, Rodgers is on the game 21% owned. Cunha is down at 2% or 2.5%, and Dibbling's 3.2%. But it's even lower than that at my rank for Cunha and Dibbling. And also, Rodgers is up at about 40 to 50% amongst engaged managers. Like, Rodgers is very highly owned. You could see that as a reason to just start Rodgers and not get punished, but I'm looking at it potentially as an opportunity. I'll leave it there because it's a very niche decision just for me, but that's what I'm currently thinking. Haaland will have the armband. I've currently got the Vice on Solanke because I think it's a really nice game for him. In terms of transfers and money in the bank, I've got 2 free transfers and 0.1 in the bank, but I just don't see a need to use one this week. The only position that I could see is doing Saka to one of Son or Foden, but we've discussed that in enough detail. So yeah, let me know what you think of the team. Let me know what your plans are, and make sure to tune into the deadline stream tomorrow. So guys, there we have it. That is the Game Week 8 deadline decisions video. Hopefully you did enjoy, and if you did, please do smash that like button and make sure to subscribe as well. Until next time, which will be the deadline stream tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.